Well, by now you've probably heard the story of Charlotte Bellis, a New Zealand journalist who until yesterday was being denied entry to her own country. This despite the fact that she was pregnant, unmarried and stranded in Afghanistan, a country ruled by the Taliban. Now, until recently, Charlotte was a reporter for Al Jazeera in Qatar, but on discovering she was pregnant, she had to quit her job and leave the country, well, for her own safety, as she's not married to a partner and premarital sex is a criminal offence in that part of the world. Not allowed back home in New Zealand, the only options were to country hop on tourist visas until the baby was born, or go live in Afghanistan where she holds a visa. She chose the latter. Now we're talking about a country here where the health system, according to the UN, is teetering on the brink of collapse and is estimated to have 51,000 additional maternal deaths before 2025. Not to mention Afghanistan is under the rule of the Taliban, a brutal Islamist group where women's rights are close to non-existent. And yet Jacinda Ardern's government would not allow Charlotte to return to her home country. Only after her story went viral, gaining headlines around the world, did the New Zealand authorities relent. Yesterday, the happy news came through that Charlotte will be allowed to return home. But how many other New Zealanders are there in similar situations? Joining me now from Mexico is Charlotte's lawyer, Tudor Clee. Tudor, it's mind-blowing to me that Jacinda Ardern, a supposed champion of women and women's rights, would deny Charlotte entry to her own country. No doubt a large part of the reason the New Zealand authorities changed their position was due to the media attention and the backlash it caused. Tell us, please, what happened when Charlotte first applied to return home and about the backflip we saw yesterday.
She applied to return home last week, and her application was actually completed by me personally to ensure that it complied with all the paperwork and that it would be granted promptly. I've assisted over 30 women and partners pro bono to get back to New Zealand to give birth safely. So I thought I had the experience to do it. And in spite of having every piece of paper done correctly, it was declined within 24 hours. And she was essentially told, hard luck, I guess good luck, have the baby in Afghanistan.
On what grounds did they decline it so quickly?
Essentially, the only rule that you can apply under for pregnancy is if it's a scheduled medical event. So the government in New Zealand doesn't consider having the baby as a scheduled medical event unless you're having an induction or a cesarean. So essentially, if Charlotte had just said, look, I'm going to force myself to have an induction or a cesarean, then she would at least come into the criteria. And so we're essentially telling women what their birth plan should be just so they can exercise the right to give birth in their own country. I mean, this is the grossest...
Not a very feminist position.
Oh, this is the grossest abuse of women's reproductive rights in a generation. I mean, women are still fighting for the right to say whether or not they'll even have a baby. And in New Zealand, we've mostly settled that. And now we're telling women that the government will decide how, when, and where they can have a New Zealand citizen child. Now, it's reprehensible. The reality is this: if New Zealand is being led as a progressive country by Jacinda Ardern, the only thing she should have said is, here's my passport and here's my ultrasound. This is the date I'm coming back to deliver my daughter in New Zealand. Instead, she got given all of these conditions, was rejected within 24 hours, and had no choice but to take her story to the media. And it's humiliating because, as you know, the moment you put your story out in the media, there's trolls, there's people asking questions about your privacy. You're explaining your private medical details for the world to see. I mean, it is absolutely disgusting that women have to degrade themselves in this way and share this information just so they can go back to their own country to safely give birth.
To your knowledge, are there other countries in the world right now that will not allow their citizens to return, that have still got their borders closed to their citizens, whether they're pregnant or not, the way New Zealand has?
Well, certainly not that I'm aware of. And I've been traveling with my own it was a 5-week-old baby throughout Europe, the Caribbean, Central America for the last 5 months. And even those countries welcome me in. So presumably they let their own citizens come back to receive proper medical care.
Now, you've started the Baby Bridge initiative, which helps pregnant New Zealand women get home. You mentioned you've got 30 of these women home already, and you've taken on many cases, some going to the High Court. Tell us if you've still got people stranded like Charlotte who perhaps aren't getting the media attention, and is there any relief in sight? Is there any end to these insane border restrictions that are forcing women to jump through loopholes just so they can go home to give birth?
Well, the reality is no. And that's because in Charlotte's case, they refused to even deal with it as a pregnancy matter because of this hostility to allowing women to come back and give birth. In the last 8 months, 220 women or partners have applied under the pregnancy category to come back to New Zealand, and 29 have been approved. So that's 1 in 7 chance you have to come back. And if you took out the women and partners that myself and Roshni Sami assisted, which was 40% of that total, it would mean that women only have a 7% chance of either giving birth in New Zealand or having their partner with them. And you have to ask the question
7%.
then, is 7% get it? And Jacinda Ardern came out to try to defend this today by saying there's been hard decisions. But in the same week that I went to the High Court for 5 women to have their basic maternal rights respected, who'd all been declined, the government approved 8 DJs to fly from the United Kingdom to come down and play concerts in New Zealand. So there's no capacity issue. The only hard decision for Jacinda Ardern is, do you prioritize women's reproductive rights above that of foreign DJs? I mean, isn't it extraordinary that you're 12 times more likely to be granted an MIQ spot in New Zealand if you apply as a foreign DJ than as a pregnant New Zealand woman wishing to come back and give birth safely?
That's incredible. Tudor Clee, thank you so much for the work you're doing. It's important, and I hope we speak to you again. If you've got another case like this that you want to bring attention to, we will be more than happy to give it the attention it deserves.
Thank you, Rita.